everybody, welcome to the latest episode of the Dobbin Bandits. I'm Orrin Phillips. We have a returning legend on the show today. Who is it? What's another than Gerry Conway? We were privileged to have Gerry Conway on a couple of years ago. He's back now. Just having a talk to him about, how he creates characters, some of the projects he worked on. This guy has done just about everything and has done it masterfully. His stories are some of the most legendary things in comics history. And to have him back to talk to him, it was an absolute thrill. So, without any further ado, here's Gerry. Gerry Conway coming back on the show. Sir, thank you so much.
Oh, you bet. That's my pleasure.
So I'll start. I spoke before about the process of your writing, and one thing that I mean, there's so much I admire about your career, but you worked on a number of books all at the same time at some points. How do you sort of keep blinders on and keep focused on what you were working on, and not be like, you know what, oh, this might be good for this, or get things sort of mixed up?
Well, I hmm. Each book has a different flavor. There's a different approach that I take to each book. For a single character book, there are certain limitations. You're going to be focused. I'm going to be focused on character work. Uh, there's going to be some overriding storyline in with the supporting characters, um, and that keeps me focused because I have to keep track of what's going on in that. With a group book, uh, there weirdly there's actually less that you have to keep track of because there's less likelihood of doing a an overarching storyline because each character is represented in another series where uh, their character arcs are dominated by the creators of that series. So in those cases, I'm more focused on a one or two story uh, approach for the group as a whole, and I focus more intently on characters who don't have a series of their own, uh, which allows me to keep track of those books. Um, Also, the different books have, as I said, different flavors. So, for example, when I was writing Batman, there was I had a sense of uh, focusing more on the detective angle of the book. You know, there was a mystery that had to be solved. Um, there were complications with uh, uh, background characters that I would focus on. Then I would go over to Justice League, and it's a completely different box. Uh, there's, except in the case of Red Tornado and maybe Zatanna, there were less opportunities to create character arcs. So it became about the story uh, more than the characters. Although I tried to keep each character individuated uh, and provide focus for those characters. Um, so there again, and even between group books, I mean, you take a book like Legion of Superheroes and Justice League, they're completely different animals because one is, of course, set in a future which allows you to uh, invent things that you couldn't otherwise invent. Uh, and because those characters were all focused uh, in that book, they didn't have solo adventures. Uh, I could create story arcs that interwove with the characters playing off each other. Um, so that's kind of the situation. I mean, that's how I managed to differentiate those books.
What about for you? Because I know you've also you've done some horror, you've done some Western, some war stories. Um,
Mm-hmm.
is that a whole different flavor as well to get, sort of get that sort of tone that goes into those books?
Yeah, oh, yeah. I mean, horror stories uh, depend upon suspense
Mhm.
and again, a focus on a single character who's experiencing something horrific,
Mhm.
uh, and they're short. I mean, they have to pay off in a short format. The westerns. I mean, I wrote Scalp Hunter,
Mhm.
and my conceit with that book was that it was occurring in real time during the Civil War. So everything played out according to what was happening at that time
Mhm.
during the Civil War, which really gave me an opportunity to play to one of my interests, which is the Civil War.
Mhm.
Uh, and it allowed me to differentiate that book completely from even other Westerns because we're dealing with the Civil War. Uh, that, that's very specific.
Mhm.
Um, I don't think I did any other Western characters. I may have dropped in for an issue or two
Mhm.
on something, but nothing long range like Scalp Hunter.
With horror, I wanted to get your opinion between suspense and gore. You know, that
Yeah.
sometimes horror becomes just we're
Mm-hmm.
going to bombard you with these disturbing images, and that's going to be the story that you're going to be shook up, as opposed to what you were doing, where it was this is something that's going to build inside you, and like you said, there's a payoff at the end. There's going to be a bit of a twist.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't like gore.
Mhm.
I mean, realistic gore, I don't like.
Right.
Uh, Gore that's, fanciful or silly, I'll play into that. But my taste has certainly changed over the decades.
Mhm.
Um, I was always disturbed by gore horror movies. The Last House on the Left, really freaked me out.
Right.
Uh, the Hills Have Eyes. I,
Mhm.
I I couldn't take it.
Right.
And then once it became horror porn, uh, with the advent of Saw,
Mhm.
I dropped out. That was I would not watch that stuff. Uh, so that's showing my age, and that's a reflection of a generational thing. I mean, Gen Z and to an extent Gen X who really got into it. My son-in-law is a Saw fan, and
Mhm.
one of my presents to him for his birthday was a complete collection of Saw uh, movies, uh, which none of which I have watched.
I've not seen them either.
So I prefer suspense. I think it's emotionally more fulfilling.
Mhm.
Uh, you get an opportunity to identify with the character who's going through that stress, and then there is a payoff with either a twist or a revelation of some
Mhm.
kind. So I probably wouldn't consider the stories that I wrote really horror.
Mhm.
They're more suspense and thriller.
You mentioned something very interesting that, you've changed, times have changed from when you wrote these to now. Are there any things you look back on at this point and say, right now I would have done this maybe like this instead of like that?
Well, yes. I'm embarrassed by some of my over the top Marvel writing in the early 70s. Um, I was learning my way. I was a kid, uh, and I was trying to pattern myself uh, in the manner of
Mhm.
Stan Lee, who wrote kind of an over the top uh, style, although he restrained it more than I did. I mean, many of my characters spent most of their time yelling. Uh, and I look back at that and I think, I could have toned it down a bit. I was actually I've been rereading my Daredevil run from
Mhm.
that period, and I'm very happy with some of it. Some of it I thought was pretty well done for what it was.
Mhm.
Uh, when I was restrained, I felt pretty good about that. Um, I was particularly happy with the Daredevil Black Widow run
Mhm.
that I think, when they were in San Francisco, it allowed me a little more leeway to work with the characters. Uh, and my Spider-Man run, I was pretty happy with, especially after Gwen Stacy passed,
Mhm.
uh, because it allowed me to develop the relationship with Mary Jane, Peter
Mhm.
with Mary Jane. Um, and that had an arc. And then the the clone uh, period uh, also had an arc
Mhm.
that allowed me to develop the characters and do this pretty sophisticated for the time
Mhm.
work. Um, I was happier, I think, with my work, some of my work at DC, because it was more restrained um, and a little more sophisticated.
Mhm.
Um, and then my return to Marvel with Web of Spider-Man and Spectacular Spider-Man was, I think, much more sophisticated and adult because I was more sophisticated and adult. Uh, you know, I, 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 I remember something Samuel Delaney, the science fiction writer, uh, told me. Uh, he had been he had published his first novel or two when he was like 18, 19. Um, and when they were in the process of being reprinted, he started rewriting them, which, you know, was kind of complicated. And then Tom Delaney said to him, another science fiction writer, said to him, have a little respect for that young guy. Let him be. Uh, and Sam Delaney uh, took that advice seriously and passed it on to me. And I try to take respect of that kid who was writing those stories and finding his way.
How do you build a relationship like you did with, Peter and Mary Jane and Daredevil and Black Widow? How do you pace it so it's not like
Mm.
all of a sudden they're in love, but at the same time you don't want readers to be like, oh my gosh, here they go again. How did you sort of break it down so little by little you could start to see the sparks get together?
Well, uh, that was instinctual. I knew that I couldn't. I mean, Peter was through a major trauma.
Hmm.
He had to take time to process it and to uh, come to terms with it and open himself up
Hmm.
to Mary Jane. Uh, Mary Jane had to grow up. She had to make herself available emotionally rather than through the defensiveness that, of the party girl
Hmm.
mentality, uh, which she started to do in ASM 122, when she went to Peter, when he was grieving.
Hmm.
Uh, and that opened the door, and then uh, step by step, I had to, you know, bring them slowly together until eventually we had that wonderful kiss
Mhm.
in the airport as Peter was going away, and he really acknowledged his feelings for Mary Jane, and she was available emotionally to receive it. Um, yeah, I was really proud of that arc. And it took about, I think it was about 6 months
Mhm.
that, it played out, which felt at the time like the appropriate amount of space.
Mhm.
It's also suspenseful. Are they going to get together?
Mhm.
Is it going to work out? Uh, that's something readers enjoy,
Mhm.
and I enjoy as a writer because it's a lot of fun because you know what's going to happen eventually, and it's just a matter of getting there and waiting for it.
Was there ever, I mean, if readers had sort of had a negative reaction to Mary Jane, would you guys have maybe put the brakes on it and been like they gone their separate ways? Or did you think that this was the right character to be with Peter?
I was pretty confident.
Hmm.
They had a history,
Hmm.
which for some reason Stan abandoned.
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, here's a perfect combination, of uh, an aggressive female personality
Hmm.
uh, whose relationship with Peter was always going to be full of fireworks.
Hmm.
Uh, I was happy to get rid of Gwen,
Right.
although there was a big blowback from people who really didn't know any better,
Hmm.
in my opinion. I mean, Gwen had only been with Peter for uh, 3 to 4 years.
Hmm.
She wasn't exactly Lois Lane,
Right.
and she didn't have much personality. Mary Jane had been there first.
Hmm.
She had been there with Face a Tiger. You hit the jackpot.
Hmm.
Uh, why Stan chose not to develop that relationship, I have no idea.
Right.
But when I had the opportunity, I went for it. And the readership gradually embraced it to the degree that when it looked like they weren't going to get together,
Hmm.
uh, they were unhappy. But they kept reading. That's proof in the pudding. Um, so it was inevitable. I think that it just felt right.
Hmm.
Um, so I while I got blowback for killing off Gwen, I
Hmm.
didn't get any blowback for bringing Mary Jane on the scene.
Right. You've worked with a number of editors throughout your various projects. In your opinion, what does an editor need to do to get the best out of you?
Uh, Let me loose. Don't second guess me that much, but guide me. If he sees that I'm going in a wrong direction, or I'm not fulfilling what I set up before,
Mhm.
that's helpful. That is very helpful. Uh, Rewriting me is not a good thing.
Mhm.
Uh, I don't take well. Although if I'm pandering in some way, again, I appreciate being caught up. Don't be arbitrary. You know,
Mhm.
be supportive. Um, uh, Direct me when I'm going astray. Uh, my, some of my favorite editors, Roy Thomas, Nick Lowe,
Mhm.
Julie Schwartz.
Mhm.
Uh, Julie had a heavy hand, but he was inventive. He was smart.
Mhm.
He had a history that really gave him a lot to say in a helpful way. We used to plot stories out together.
Mhm.
Um, so he was very helpful. Len Wein was very helpful. Um, uh, in recent years, Nick Lowe has been very helpful.
Mhm.
Um, it depends upon the relationship that you develop. Uh, some people are unhelpful. Uh, you know, they think they know better than I do with a real history. Um, that's not good. That doesn't help. Um, I wouldn't name anyone, but
Mhm.
it's been hard when it happens.
That's,
Um, I want a good relationship with my editors. I won't have. Um, so that's how I look at it.
how did you push through when there were tough times like that? Did you just sort of say, okay, let's just get through this project and go from there, or stick to your guns and say, like, listen, I know what I'm doing. You know, uh,
Right. Well,
please,
it really depended on the editor who was either receptive to that or not.
right.
Sometimes it was just a job.
Mhm.
Uh, Sometimes uh, I respected their opinion, even though I didn't agree with it.
Mhm.
I mean, an example is Murray Boltinoff,
Mhm.
who had a very different approach to things than I did, but he was Murray Boltinoff. He'd been around forever. I got to take what he has to say
Mhm.
and respect, the alternate universe that his characters lived in. Uh, you know, it was very different. I got to do several stories for Murray, uh, and we didn't see things the same way, but I respected his opinion and went with what he wanted to do.
Mhm.
Um, he's Murray bolted off. You don't get any better than that.
What kind of relationship did you like to have with the artists you were working with?
Well, to the extent that I was actually collaborating with them, which
Mhm.
was more true at Marvel than at DC.
Mhm.
Um, I really wanted to work with uh, their strengths
Mhm.
and give them the leeway to tell their story the way they wanted to tell it.
Mhm.
Um, uh, I mean, it was great working with Gene Colan, who needed more guidance in terms of pacing
Oh.
than, say, Ross Andru,
Mhm.
who was a terrific storyteller
Mhm.
and a great collaborator. So I had less to do with Ross. In terms of Alex Saviak and Sal Buscema, they were also great storytellers and really good at pacing and really good at creating great scenes.
Mhm.
So there wasn't much that I needed to bring to that table in that regard. I would work with them uh, dealing with character and story, overall story. Uh, in terms of actually pacing the story out and telling the story, uh, it was pretty easy. Uh, at DC, uh, with the exception of George Perez on JLA, uh, I was dealing with full scripts, and that required. Uh, I, I mean, it developed more distance, but I still tried to play to the individual artist's strengths.
Mhm.
I knew that Gene was a uh, terrific artist uh, who really staged spectacular fight scenes,
Mhm.
and great character studies.
Mhm.
Um, and I was in charge of pacing. That helped uh, play to his strengths. At the same time, with someone like Don Newton, uh, I didn't really direct him very much in terms of the scripts because Don was a great storyteller,
Mhm.
um, and was really good at pacing.
Mhm.
So uh, my my fight scenes with Don were basically fight scene,
Right.
uh, and I would give like 3 or 4 panels that were fight scene, fight scene, and then Don would do it. Um, he was really good at character study,
Mhm.
so I paid to that. Uh, in terms of JLA, I went through half a dozen artists on that book, uh, and each of them had their own strengths, and I tried to, give them material that they would work well with.
Mhm.
Uh, so, it depends on the editor and the writer and the artist. Is it a collaboration? Is it not a collaboration?
Mhm.
Uh, how much distance are you given? Uh, how much play are you given?
Do you prefer a collaboration? Because I know there's some people who they give the script or they give what they have to the artist does their thing. They never speak to each other. It's just almost like a machine. This is done, then it goes to the next one. Or there's ones that you spoke of where, you set and you try to work on something together. Which do you think, or was it buried
I
by different
I
projects?
I absolutely think that working together as a collaboration is the way to go.
Mhm.
Um, because I mean, to be selfish, it's the artist is much more likely to be involved with the work if it's a collaboration. Um, also, the work is going to be a lot better. It's just going to look better. Uh, I'll be less likely to do something dumb that the artist can't accomplish,
Mhm.
uh, and it's just more rewarding personally.
Talk a little about character creation. And for you, where does it start? Does it start with the look of the character, a name, an ability, a personality trait? How did you blueprint a character? Where did you start?
Uh, some well, it depends. It kind of depends.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, for example, with Tombstone,
Mhm.
it started with the name Tombstone, which led me to various uh, identifiers. I mean, that leads to albino. You want a white tombstone. But I wanted him also to be black. That he because he was going to interact with Robbie. Uh, they were going to be they're going to have history together.
Mhm.
They were going to uh, play to each other's strengths. That's uh, in terms of conflict.
Mhm.
Um, so that developed from the name to the personality to the history uh, to uh, various aspects, develops from that. Uh, with the Punisher,
Mhm.
that was a complete collaboration with the artist, who took my sketch
Mhm.
and developed it. John Romita developed it into the iconic look.
Mhm.
Um, and I couldn't come up with a really strong name for the character, and Stan did. So that's how that worked out. That was fulfilling a need.
Mhm.
Um, I needed a strong character to introduce the Jackal because Jackal was an unknown. And how do you make an unknown seem more imposing? By having them have a lackey that's even more imposing.
Mhm.
Uh, that, it fulfills a need, but it developed beyond that into a really interesting character that had some potential. Because, anti-heroes always have potential.
Mhm.
Um, and then you have a character like the Jackal who is going to fulfill a need, which is to create the clone and have a backstory and be an interesting new villain. Um, I came up with a name for that. I was looking for something that animalistic that was also kind of uh, uh, behind the scenes. A jackal comes in after the killing, um, so he was always going to be one step removed,
Mhm.
uh, and always kind of creepy, and that's how I developed that character. As I say, each character is different.
Mhm. You've worked with pretty much all the big characters in comic books. For you, when you're working on them, how does continuity play into your storytelling? Is it a little bit of a handcuff because you like you said, you like to be free to do your stuff, but if you do something and you're going to get a letter from someone saying, no, in issue number 34, so and so said this, and it's, oh, here we go. Did you
Right.
have to do more research for those things, or did you say, listen, I'm going to do what I'm going to put out there, and this will just kind of keep things going?
Well, uh, I'm a fanboy,
Right.
so I had actually read all that stuff, and I was pretty aware of the history.
Mhm.
And if I did, uh, I mean, in the case of Marvel, if there were uh, backstory for a particular villain,
Mhm.
I could look to Roy, who is a mental encyclopedia of Marvel history.
Mhm.
Um, and Same for Jim Salicrup, who was my editor on Web and Spectacular. Um, at DC, there was surprisingly little continuity to attach myself to.
Mhm.
I With Batman, uh, I reverted to the Batman that I enjoyed reading in the '60s. Um, so a lot of the development uh, that Denny O'Neil had done, uh, I just kind of avoided it.
Okay.
I was aware of it and tried not to conflict with it, but I wanted to bring back Dr. Death. I wanted to go back to the villains of the early years.
Mhm.
That was interesting to me. Um, I did want to see some of the characters that had played out in the '70s.
Mhm.
Um, that was important to me. Um, but for the most part, there wasn't a lot of continuity to keep track of.
Mhm.
Um, the books that Julie Schwartz had edited, uh, each issue was pretty much on its own. So I would refer back to issues of Justice League that played into the individual story,
Mhm.
but I didn't feel any obligation uh, to, uh, unless it played well for character,
Mhm.
uh, to focus on the past. I tried to reinvent things uh, as
I,
I went along.
I was just about to say that because when you're working with these characters that have such a long history and oftentimes multiple books out, you know, how do you sort of reinvent the wheel every issue so it's not like, oh boy, yeah, we just did this story happened 5 years ago, except it wasn't the Joker, it was the Riddler.
Hmm.
And, how do you sort of try to keep things fresh in that sort of aspect?
It is kind of difficult. I would say you have to amuse yourself.
Mhm.
Uh, if I find something interesting, I'm pretty sure the readers will find it interesting.
Mhm.
Um, and there's no harm in repeating something that you've had done before if you twist it. If you come at it from a different angle. Um, I mean, Julie Schwartz once told me uh, that the readership basically changed every 3 years. That that was his excuse for basically doing some of the same stories every 3 years. But he's right
Mhm.
in that there are new readers coming in for whom this will be fresh. And there are old readers who might have a fond attachment to a story that they read 5 years ago. Um, I'm not saying that I ever consciously repeated a story, but it's inevitable.
Right.
There are only so many stories that you can tell.
Mhm.
And hopefully, maybe a character is taking it differently. Um, Maybe the way that you're telling it is different.
Mhm.
Uh, maybe the twist is different.
Mhm.
I've always tried to uh, do something new with everything that I did. Uh, uh, Sometimes successfully, sometimes not.
Right.
Uh,
What about handling what I kind of call shock to your system moments with the older characters, like, the death of Superman, Batman having his back broken. Um, you had it with Spider-Man and Gwen Stacy, Daredevil sort of descent and then rebirth. Do characters sort of need to have those impact moments to keep them fresh, to keep things rolling?
Absolutely. Although in the case of Superman, uh, that was that was an error in my view. I mean, it sold a lot of copies,
Right.
but it it was a cheat. And after that, every subsequent uh, death of the hero became a cheat. It became cynical, and readers didn't buy it, and it just it left a bad taste. Ultimately, I think, at least in me as
Right.
a reader, uh, and I mean, it was a dramatic move, and it probably would have been more effective if it had been real.
Right.
Uh, you know, it wasn't real, um, and people kind of knew that.
Mhm.
Uh, there was big media splash,
Mhm.
and it got, as I say, a really huge sales. But in the long run, it was damaging because any move that seemed like a big deal after that provoked some cynicism.
Right.
Uh, so, yeah, I do think there should be resets for characters. Uh, I may it's specious,
Mhm.
but I did say that a while ago that uh, DC should cancel all their books,
Mhm.
uh, give it a rest for a year, and then bring them back completely new.
Mhm.
Uh, that would be effective. That would be true. They could certainly publish a whole bunch of graphic novels
Mhm.
during that period. That's where they make their money anyway. Uh, so it would really give them a fresh start.
Mhm.
Uh, Marvel, I don't know what I don't know how they would reinvent themselves because they've had continuity.
Mhm.
And as this one writer recently in the last decade, I forget when exactly, published a book about the longest history, uh, continuous story,
Mhm.
you know, in history. And he was right. It's one long, continuous story at Marvel,
Right.
uh, except that raises embarrassing questions, like the Fantastic Four. Uh, if we were true to the continuity, they'd be dead
Yeah.
by now. Uh, you know, uh, Same with Spider-Man.
Yeah.
I think it was a mistake for him to graduate from college
Mhm.
because he's best played as a teenager.
Right.
When Marvel came, when the MCU brought him into uh, brought Spider-Man into the MCU,
Mhm.
they brought him in as a teenager. They
Right.
didn't bring him in as a 25-year-old or a 30-year-old or whatever the hell he is now.
Right.
uh, because the archetype is a teenager.
Mhm.
He's a kid figuring things out as he goes along, bearing a great responsibility,
Mhm.
which is a metaphor for adulthood. You know, it's you're in the process of growing up.
Mhm.
That's what made Spider-Man as a character who he was. You can't do that now
Mhm.
because we've got this long history and this improbable age thing that I don't know where they are. You know, I mean, they can't do it. I mean, that's what's so great to my mind about what the MCU is doing with the Fantastic Four,
Mhm.
setting it back in the 60s. That's cool. That
Mhm.
is great. You know, then we'll discover that it's a multiverse thing and they'll bring them into the continuity, but they'll bring him in as the 1960s Fantastic Four.
Right.
Uh, so yeah, that's how you handle it.
Mhm.
The multiverse is a great way to reinvent things.
Right.
Uh, I mean, the most interesting characters now are multiverse characters. Uh, Spider Gwen is terrific because she's fresh and she's new.
Mhm.
Um, she, and you couldn't do that if you were sticking to continuity because
Yes.
in continuity she is dead. You know, she is dead, dead, dead. The only character who's dead and stayed dead. That's what my big argument with Stan about bringing her back.
Mhm.
Uh, and that's why I did the clone thing because the original Gwen is dead, dead, dead. And I'm happy that they found a way to bring Spider Gwen in.
Mhm.
You know, because it makes it fun. It's interesting. Uh, I don't know. I don't know how you would redo this now. I would embrace the idea that uh, reboot every 5 years.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, DC is trying to do that. Uh, I think not as effectively as they could,
Mhm.
but at least they're trying. You know,
Right.
that's something.
I want to talk about a very niche thing, but it's something I'm fascinated with, and I love to ask people who worked on it. But you worked on a couple of projects that were licensed properties, like Thundercats. When you're doing a project like that, I hear two very different stories. One story is it's basically have at it, we're trying to sell toys or we're trying to sell this cartoon, so we don't really have, a set in history, so you can build the history you like, or it's you have to submit something every 5 minutes to make sure that five different people at corporate for the thing say that this fits, what they want to push forward. What was your experience like working with licensed properties?
Well, surprisingly easy. I mean, I worked on Thundercats
Mhm.
um, and basically they wanted to follow the cartoons.
Okay.
You know, here cartoons do a different version of that,
Right.
and we did. And I tried to be as I mean, that was my first work back at Marvel, so I felt like I had to prove myself, you know, in a way. So
Mhm.
I tried to make it as entertaining and interesting as possible. I mean, it's a good series, you know, as a comic book and as a animation. It was fun. It was fun to do. And then I think I did another one that was a licensed property, uh, which I can't remember. Uh, it, it, also from Marvel.
Mhm.
Uh, and that again, there was not a go with it.
Mhm.
Um, I think they've become more anal about it in recent years
Right.
because, especially the Star Wars material, had to be rigorously uh, looked dealt with
Mhm.
uh, because Lucasfilm was very protective of that material during the interregnum
Mhm.
before the prequels.
Mhm.
They needed that material to keep the characters and situations alive, so they needed it to follow a certain pattern.
Right. You just said something a few moments ago I thought was absolutely fascinating. As you said, when you're doing Thundercats, it's your first work back at Marvel after being at DC for a while, and you felt like you needed to prove yourself. I think that's fascinating because you're Gerry Conway. Like the list of things you were doing at Marvel, at DC, it's not like you were doing, books that nobody's reading. These are the big titles. Why did you feel going back there, you sort of had to rebuild, who you were?
Well, two reasons. First, I left DC uh, in a very bad way.
Mhm.
I had not been doing my best work
Mhm.
uh, during that period. I was having a lot of trouble uh, focusing. Uh, uh, I had what amounted to uh, a story block, a writer's block. Uh, I was depending upon my wife at the time, Carla, to help with writing some of the material, and it was showing. Um, and I basically had a breakdown. Uh, that was reason number one.
Mhm.
Reason number two was I think Jim Shooter hated me. Uh, he was, I mean, he and I had a very similar history.
Mhm.
We both got into the business at a very young age. Um, and I think he felt competitive with me
Mhm.
in some reason. Um, he was very negative about my work on the second, on the first or only JLA Avengers crossover.
Right.
He stomped all over it,
Mhm.
which, I mean, again, given my history, was kind of weird.
Right.
Um, so I do think he was kind of jealous or competitive for no particularly good reason, because I had nothing bad to say about him. And as a result, I felt like I needed to prove myself to Jim, which was true. Uh, I gradually moved up the ladder at Marvel. I got into the new universe. I did, another uh, uh, license book.
Mhm.
Uh, and then Jim Shooter was able to bring me over to Spider-Man with Jim's endorsement, which it never would have happened if Jim hadn't said okay. Uh, I proved myself that I was willing to eat dirt. you know, and I think that played a lot into it. And I also knew that I needed to recover my writing skills
Right.
because of reason number one.
Right.
Uh, I needed to reinvent myself.
I mean, how do you know you're starting to hit that wall, or how do you know it's time to maybe move off a project? Because, like you said, it's a writer's block. You're not coming up with these ideas. When do you start to get the feeling that, okay, it's maybe time to move on to something else?
I think it was with the JLA Detroit.
Okay.
I had conflicts with my editor at that time on that book. I didn't get the support that I felt the book needed.
Mhm.
Uh, and I dropped out of it, and I I just started to lose confidence in myself because I was really, the book was derided at the time
Mhm.
because of the change, and I was discouraged. I felt like there was something wrong with my writing, and
Mhm.
that, of course, led to this being something wrong with my writing,
Right.
which then led to me losing confidence in myself. Which then, of course, that last year was a struggle, and I had to leave in order to uh, get better,
Right.
to strengthen myself again uh, by doing various things for Marvel.
Mhm.
Some Conan work, on Savage Sword of Conan. That helped a
Mhm.
great deal because that was kind of outside Jim's uh, venue. Uh, and it took a while, but I became more confident and a better writer, I think, in a lot of ways. Uh, and eventually, I moved into television and had to give up the comic book writing, but I always wanted to come back to it. Uh, and when I had the opportunity after retiring from TV, that's what I did. I did some comic book writing and had a lot of fun doing it.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah,
You spoke before about the reset of how important that is. Like you said, every 5 years you would reset it. You mentioned New Universe, which kind of for Marvel's reset, it's basically saying, forget everything that happened before. We're starting from new, and we're going to go from there. I
right.
spoke to Mr. Shooter, and he said he would have loved to have stopped the Marvel books and had this, sort of go forward to give them a bigger push. What was your thought on the new universe, idea-wise, and why do you think it sort of didn't take off the way maybe he anticipated or others anticipated it would?
Uh, it was a good idea to do a new universe.
Mhm.
The, Unfortunately, none of the books were that interesting. That's why it failed. I mean, um, Jim had a conscious approach that it was supposed to be realistic, um, and that there would only be like one superhero in the new universe.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, the readers weren't interested in that. Um, they the books were kind of bland and uh, didn't feel like didn't feel particularly fresh. They felt like, eh, take it or leave it. I mean, it was a really good idea of Jim's. The execution was not that great.
And I think also something he mentioned was turnover started happening quite quickly with these books. So, folks who are reading it might have been used to a certain team, and then suddenly it's these people, and then it's going to be someone else. And so you kind of lose your focus as to,
Yeah,
oh, okay, it sort of becomes a tryout book.
yeah, and they didn't put major artists on it.
Hmm.
They So there was no fan base to build on.
Right,
I mean, maybe people would have checked it out if John Buscema was uh, the artist on one of the books.
right.
Maybe they would have checked it out, if Alex Saviek or Sal Buscema was one of the artists. They put second tier artists on the book, guys who were talented but hadn't gotten there yet.
Right.
They just it felt like that there was not a lot of confidence
Hmm.
in the concept of second universe. Um, I don't think the creative teams were enthusiastic
Hmm.
about it, and Jim was unhappy with their work, so he kept pushing for new people.
Right.
Um, yeah, it was a valiant effort.
Right.
Uh, you know, much like the new 52. Something that was worth trying
Right.
um, and went in the right direction. Like they basically canceled the line for a month or two.
Mhm.
With the retro comics that filled in the gap, um, but the fresh reboot didn't go far enough. It's like if you're going to do a new Flash, do a new Flash.
Yeah.
Do something interesting with the character
Mhm.
that really changes it up. It's not like the readers are going to suddenly drop the book. They're going to want to see what's happening. I mean,
Mhm.
I think what the new costume that they got for him. I think I don't really read comics that
Mhm.
much anymore, That's great. It's a good look. It's a new look. Um, the, I mean, when they rebooted the Superman, they got rid of the belt.
Right.
They got rid of the undies. Eh, you know, I mean, that looks okay, but it's not really a reboot. A
Right.
reboot would be a new Kal-El,
Mhm.
something different. Give them a new backstory.
Yeah.
Just try something. Um, we're they have corporate masters who want more of the same,
Mhm.
um, and there's a level of cowardice at the top that keeps things from changing.
Right.
So got to keep that IP.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I just wanted to get your quick thoughts on the rise of the art, like image and stuff like that. Did you think, and when everything was being foiled and stuff like that, did you think that was going to last? Do you think that was a winning combination, or did you see
oh,
the boom
I
with it?
was very hopeful for it. I'm a big fan of the Image
Yeah.
books and the Dark Horse books,
Mhm.
and they're actually the things I read now
Right.
because they're fresh, they're new, they're something different. They take a
Right.
different approach. They're more grown up.
Right.
Um, so those books, I was pretty confident. Well, I mean, they started off with a fan base,
Right.
in the artists,
Mhm.
um, and then they broadened it out to new people who were really good.
Yeah.
It's not like you can look at an Image book and say, you know, they really present something.
Yep.
The same with Dark Horse. They got the Magnolia universe,
Mhm.
and that's similar to the Lee Kirby universe,
Right.
in that you can build on it and keep building on it. And
Mhm.
you've got you know different types of stories that they're telling.
Right.
That's a lot of fun,
Yeah.
and it's a way to really create a fan base. You
Mhm.
need a fan base as a floor, and then you need something that's going to draw in new readers,
Right.
and keep old readers who are not quote fans.
Right. I just want to say thank you again, taking the time to speak today. Just one last thing, and it's a doozy, and I have to ask, what's you at your best? If someone said to you, Gerry Conway, what's you at your best? You had to pick one thing you did to say this was me hitting all cylinders. What would it be?
Spider, I think I nailed that in a way that surprised me rereading it. Uh, I didn't embarrass myself with overreach.
Mhm.
Uh, I had a payoff that really worked. It worked on a character level. It worked on a story level. It worked on a series level.
Right.
It was probably the most perfect single thing I've ever done. And I did it, unfortunately, 50 years ago. So,
And we're back. So yeah, man, that was just so awesome to talk to Gerry again. Uh, he has worked on so many characters, Superman, Spider-Man, Batman, you name it, he's done it. And for him to be able to handle so many different types of stories, the creativity he has to create these tales is absolutely unbelievable. We're truly privileged to have the opportunity to speak to him, and we wish him all the best. And we wish you guys all the best. Thank you guys for tuning in. Great stuff coming up for you as well. So we will see you soon.